Hello and welcome back to Learning with Lulu. In this video we are going to be doing a somewhat quick summary of chapter 3 in Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. So chapter 3 is where we are invited into one of the Great Gatsby's very elaborate parties. And it's in this chapter also that we officially meet Jay Gatsby, though the air of mystery around him isn't entirely dispelled. If anything, gets almost built up. And as a really quick summary, like if I were to put it into a single sentence, this chapter, okay, I don't know about a single sentence, but it's a chapter where we're invited to one of Gatsby's parties. We are introduced to him. The air of mystery is not dispelled. If anything, it's increased, because while there are these incredibly lavish, garish parties full of drinking and opulence and abundance of just everything from people's emotions to the alcohol to the barrels of limes and oranges. While there's all of this, the introduction of Jay Gatsby is not entirely what you'd expect. He is young, personable. He doesn't really take part in these parties he throws. For example, he does not drink during his parties. He stays sober for them. And just like when Nick first sees him, or we as a reader first see him, he's standing alone. He kind of is set apart from everyone else that he draws in with these parties. That's that. The end of the chapter, we know that Jordan Baker has been told something remarkable by Jay Gatsby. He wanted to speak with her privately. They did. As the reader, we don't know what is being said, but she comes away knowing something about him that astounds her. And so we know that in Nick's circle of friends, there is some inside information about this Jay Gatsby character. Because as we've covered in the previous two chapters, there's just a bunch of random speculation and gossip that goes around about Jay Gatsby. And then if we were to be keeping this video as short as possible, the other thing I'd touch on that I think, if you're reading this book for school or covering it for something academic, the other thing I think that would be touched on in this chapter is Owl Eyes, which is the name or identifier that Nick Carraway gives this man that he and Jordan come across in Gatsby's library in Gatsby's mansion. And he says owl eyes because this guy is wearing spectacles and he's just very wide-eyed. He's very drunk, and he goes on and on about how the books in Gatsby's library are real. He expected them to just be empty covers to give the appearance of a really grand library, but really it's a false front. It's like Vegas, essentially. Well, my perception of Vegas. But he finds that the books are actually full of substance. So take that as you will. Obviously, there's some symbolism to be had there where, this man is expecting Gatsby's opulence to be hollow, and turns out it's not. So there's that. Now, to get into a slightly longer version and summary of the chapter. Chronologically, the chapter starts with Nick talking about one of the reasons Gatsby has become so famous in New York and in the local society and gossip even, is because of these very elaborate parties he throws and just how abundantly rich he is. And Nick one day is brought an invitation by Gatsby's chauffeur to actually come to Gatsby's party. And In this chapter, we're told that that is pretty unique. Nick guesses while he is at the party that he's probably the only person who's actually been invited. People just show up to these parties, almost like they're people showing up to an amusement park, and they act like they're in an amusement park while they're at these parties. They're not actually invited, they just come. And it brings in West Eggers and East Eggers alike. And obviously there's this weird, not like direct outward conflict, but just kind of in the some of the tensions that you see of like the wealthy East Egger men and their interactions with each other and with people, and trying to connect with these West Eggers who have built their fortunes by their own doing. They're just these crazy parties where you could say almost a small scale political era takes on. And political in the sense of not like the country's politics or a nation's politics, but politics as far as social interactions go. Nick is at this party somewhat similarly to chapter 2, where he feels a little out of place with the small party at Tom's apartment for Myrtle. Nick feels a little bit out of place. And then he spots Jordan Baker, and so he says hello and kind of attaches himself to her throughout the evening so that he has someone to be at the party with. And as they're at this party, guests are all still in that speculation mode about their host. No one actually can tell him who is the host of the party. No one can point him out. They don't even know. There is one part where Nick is talking to one of Jordan's friends. Her name is Lucille, and she speculates that Gatsby was actually a German spy during the war. Nick also hears that Gatsby went to Oxford. And then you even have stuff as wild as that he once killed a man unprovocated or in cold blood. Not only are they talking about these speculations about Gatsby, but they also talk about just how elaborate he is and his wealth is. One person even talks about how she once spilled something on her dress at one of his parties, and shortly after, she was delivered a beautiful new dress in the mail from Gatsby. Him being so generous with the people who attend his parties, they even kind of wonder if he is that way because he doesn't want any conflict or confrontation with anyone, because he's possibly done something against the law. So he doesn't want authorities looking into him were someone to leave one of his parties upset. So he tries to have everyone who leaves his parties just feel like a kid who left the amusement park with a bunch of cotton candy. And it seems that he's successful in that. The evening progresses. People are getting excessively more and more drunk. And Jordan and Nick are both fairly curious about their host, Gatsby. And so they kind of make it their mission to actually find him in the evening. They go into the house, and like I said, they meet this man in the library. Nick calls him Owl Eyes, and this guy is astounded that the books in the library are real. And he drunkenly just keeps on going on and on about that. Nick and Jordan don't find Gatsby in the house. They go back outside around midnight. They sit at a table with someone that is similar in age to Nick, he feels, and describes him as attractive looking. He's young, attractive, very personable. They seem to recognize each other, and they realize that they served in the same division or something in the war, which this would be World War I. And as they're talking, Nick mentions trying to figure out who the host is, and this young man says, "Oh, I thought you knew. It's me. I'm Jay Gatsby." So we've finally met this Jay Gatsby. Like I said, he still has this mysterious air about him. He has a very decided way of speech. He abstains from drinking at the party. He kind of is set apart in this his own way, and he's not exactly what you would what perhaps you as a reader had expected of the host of these amusement park-like parties. We realize that Gatsby has this trait of calling people old sport, and he calls Nick that a lot in the evening. And as things progress, you definitely get the sense that Nick is fascinated by this guy. A couple of hours pass. It's around 2 o'clock in the morning. Party still has not ended, but it's winding down. Couples are fighting over whether or not they should leave. Generally, it's the wives wanting to stay while the husbands are kind of like, let's go. And it's at this point, as I mentioned, that Jordan is told that Gatsby wants to talk to her. It's a butler that comes and gets Jordan, so she goes and talks to Gatsby. Nick waits around. Jordan comes back out, says, I've just learned something remarkable, but I can't see anything. Of course. Now, within a few chapters, we will learn what Jordan learns. So it's not one of those things where it just keeps us hanging indefinitely. We are eventually going to be told what Gatsby told Jordan. Then they're ready to leave the party. Nick says goodbye to Gatsby. Gatsby continues to call him old sport. I want to say he even says that he's going to take him on like a hydroplane the next day. Or he's just going to continue to like build up Nick and kind of foster this friendship with him. Then Gatsby's butler comes out, says, hey, Philadelphia's on the phone with you, as though the whole city of Philadelphia is on the phone for him. That's not the case. You can assume that Gatsby has connections in multiple cities, and so rather than saying, hey, so-and-so is on the phone, they just identify by the city which business association is calling him. That's my take of why we would say Philadelphia is on the phone for you. Let me know if that is clear or if you need any clarification on what I mean by that. Obviously, Nick doesn't have a very long way home, so he starts to walk home, which on the way out, he sees this owl eyes man again, and there's been someone's had car issues. I want to say like one of the wheels got stuck in a ditch, or someone was so drunk that they drove it into a ditch. And this owl eyes man, he and another man are trying to get out of this car, and they're drunk and not really even understanding that the car cannot be driven anymore. You really get a glimpse at how incoherent people are. You get the sense that Nick continues to attend parties that are thrown by Gatsby, but it is suggested that Nick doesn't want you to think that's all he does with his time. So he goes on to tell you about how he works in the city. He likes to take long walks. He started to date this woman, but that kind of disintegrated. And then he does start to pursue Jordan Baker more. And where at the beginning of the novel, Nick announces that he is very driven by morals and honesty, you get the sense that he's kind of like pulling back a little bit from really holding others to a high standard, because he knows Jordan Baker is dishonest. He knows that in her first golf tournament, somehow she cheated. And he sees her as selfish and, you know, kind of looking down on others, kind of the way I described her in the chapter 1 summary, just holds herself above others, snobbish perhaps, but yet he is attracted to her, and they do start to form an attachment and a relationship with each other. That's essentially chapter 3. Now, to give you some of those finer details, maybe some quotes from the chapter, as I like to do. So speaking of Gatsby's elaborate parties, remember I mentioned that he has just inordinate amounts of oranges and lemons. It says every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrive from a fruitier in New York. So 5 crates of oranges and lemons for these parties. When he's talking about the liquor at the party, it says, in the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up and stocked with gins and liquors and with cordials so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another. Described the air as alive at these parties. When Nick is observing how people greet each other at these parties, he says, enthusiastic meetings between women who never knew each other's names. So, you know, he's witnessing these people who don't even know each other act so enthusiastic and happy to see each other, even though they don't actually even know each other. He uses the term amusement park when talking about Gatsby's parties. And then when he's trying to find the host, Gatsby, he says, I made an attempt to find my host, but the 2 or 3 people of whom I asked his whereabouts stared at me in such an amazed way and denied so vehemently any knowledge of his movements that I slunk off in the direction of the cocktail table, the only place in the garden where a single man could linger without looking purposeless and alone. So that's before he found Jordan. But just the amazed way people react when he's saying, hey, do you know who our host is, kind of shows you almost the ridiculous aspect of these parties, that people are like, why would I know where the host is or who the host is? At these parties, they serve 2 suppers. One is served after midnight. Obviously, the first one is served earlier in the evening. Okay, and then as the last thing to share, I want to read you a section of a paragraph of Nick describing this first encounter with Gatsby. He says, he smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole eternal world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just so far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that at your best you hope to convey. Just let that sit with a second. Imagine being around someone who makes you feel that way, who makes you feel understood, but not too vulnerable, not more exposed than you would want to be. And I love the wording of irresistible prejudice in your favor. So it's someone who is committed to seeing the best in you, or at least that's this look, this feeling that being in the presence gives you. So again, Nick feels very welcomed by this Jay Gatsby character. And he is this very personal person who's able to give this smile that conveys all of these feelings in the recipient of said smile. Ooh, okay, I lied. There is one more quote from this chapter that I think you should know if you're reading The Great Gatsby. And talking to Jordan, Nick is quoting her, sharing what she said, and Jordan says, anyhow, he gives large parties. And she says, I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. So at first it seems like a bit of an oxymoron, saying, you know, a large party is actually more intimate, but it does kind of make sense. If you look at the party or the little gathering that Nick was part of the day or the chapter before, it's such a small group that you can't really withdraw. You can't kind of go slip under the radar because, you know, there are 5 people there. You're going to be seeing every person's face. Whereas at a large party, you can kind of disappear a little bit more. And if there's someone you want to disappear with, it's a little bit easier because If there are 100 people there, people won't necessarily notice if suddenly it's down to 98. So there's that quote that I actually have always remembered from this book, that large parties are more intimate than small parties. There's everything I will share from chapter 3. If you feel so inclined, make sure to comment down below any of your thoughts on the quotes, any of your interpretations on the quotes or the symbols in this chapter. Yeah, make sure to do all of the usual things. Share this with others that you know will benefit from getting a summary of chapter 3 from The Great Gatsby. And like, subscribe, and keep coming back for more ELA content. Thanks for watching. Bye.